All right. I like that method, replied Crassius, which you are accustomed to practice, namely to lay down a case similar to those which are brought on in the forum, and to speak upon it as nearly as possible, as if it were a real case. But in such efforts, the generality of students exercise only their voice, and not even that skillfully, and try their strength of lungs and volubility of tongue, and please themselves with a torrent of their own words, in which exercise what they have heard deceives them, that men by speaking succeed in becoming speakers. For it is truly said also that men by speaking badly make sure of becoming bad speakers. In those exercises, therefore, although it be useful even frequently to speak on the sudden, yet it is more advantageous after taking time to consider to speak with greater preparation and accuracy. But the chief point of all is that which, to say the truth, we hardly ever practice, for it requires great labor, which most of us avoid. I mean to write as much as possible. Writing is said to be the best and most excellent modeler and teacher of oratory, and not without reason. For if what is meditated and considered easily surpasses sudden and extemporary speech, a constant and diligent habit of writing will surely be of more effect than meditation and consideration itself. Since all the arguments relating to the subject on which we write, whether they are suggested by art or by certain power of genius and understanding, will present themselves and occur to us while we examine and contemplate it in the full light of our intellect. And all the thoughts and words which are the most expressive of their kind must of necessity come under and submit to the keenness of our judgment or while writing. And a fair arrangement and what is that word? Dang. Collocation of the words. Collocation. Sorry. And a collocation of the words is effected by writing in a certain rhythm and measure, the poetical but oratorical. Such are the qualities which bring applause and admiration to good orators, nor will any man ever attain them unless after long and great practice in writing. However resolutely he may have exercised himself in extemporary speeches. And he who comes to speak after practice in writing brings this advantage with him, that though he speak at the call of the moment, yet what he says will bear a resemblance to something written. And if ever, when he comes to speak, he brings anything with him in writing, the rest of his speech, when he departs from what is written, will flow on a similar strain. As when a boat has once been impelled forward, though the rowers suspend their efforts, the vessel herself still keeps her motion and course during the intermission of the impulse and force of the oars. So, in a continued stream of oratory, when written matter fails, the rest of the speech maintains a similar flow, being impelled by the resemblance and force acquired from what is written. 34. But in my daily exercises I used, when a youth, to adopt chiefly that method which I knew that Caius Carbo, my adversary, generally practiced, which was that, having selected some nervous piece of poetry or read over such a portion of a speech as I could retain in my memory, I used to declaim upon what I had been reading, in other words, chosen with all the judgment that I possessed. But at length I perceived that in the method there was this inconvenience, that Enos, if I exercised myself on his verses, or Gracchus, if I laid one of his orations before me, had forestalled such words as were peculiarly appropriate to the subject, and such as were the most elegant and altogether the best. So that if I used the same words, it profited nothing; if others, it was even prejudicial to me, as I habituated myself to the use such as were less eligible. Afterward, I thought proper, and continued the practice at a rather more advanced age, to translate the orations of the best Greek orators, by fixing upon which I gained this advantage, that while I rendered into Latin what I had read in Greek, I not only used the best words, and yet such as were of common occurrence, but also formed some words by imitation, which would be new to our countrymen, taking care, however, that they were unobjectionable. As to the exertion and exercise of the voice, of the breath, of the whole body, and of the tongue itself, they do not so much require art as labor. But in those matters we ought to be particularly careful whom we imitate and whom we would wish to resemble. Not only orators are to be observed by us, but even actors, lest by vicious habits we contract any awkwardness and ungracefulness. The memory is also to be exercised by learning accurately by heart as many of our own writings and those of others as we can. In exercising the writings and those of others, in exercising the memory, too, I shall not object if you accustom yourself to adopt the plan of referring to places and figures which is taught in treatises on art. Your language must then be brought forth from the domestic and retired exercise into the midst of the field, into the dust and clamor, into the camp and military array of the forum. You must acquire practice in everything. You must try the strength of your understanding, and your retired lucubrations must be exposed to the light of reality. The poet must also be studied. An acquaintance must be formed with history. The writers and teachers in all the liberal arts and sciences must be read and turned over, and must, for the sake of exercise, be praised, interpreted, corrected, censured, refuted. You must dispute on both sides of every question, and whatever may seem maintainable on any point must be brought forward and illustrated. The civil law must be thoroughly studied. Laws in general must be understood. All antiquity must be known. The usages of the Senate, the nature of our government, the rights of our allies, our treaties and conventions, and whatever concerns the interests of the state must be learned. A certain intellectual grace must also be extracted from every kind of refinement, with which, as with salt, every oration must be seasoned. I have poured forth to you all I had to say, and perhaps any citizen whom you had laid hold of in any company whatever would have replied to your inquiries on these subjects equally well.